Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us for today's IBM Community Webinar. Please welcome Winston Lee, who's a Product Manager for API Connect and Gateways, and with him we have Chris Marks, who's a Senior Software Engineer for API Connect. Today, they will be discussing making the move to API Connect version 10. You should see a box directly on your screen where you can begin to submit any of your questions. To view the presentation in full screen, just click the 4 arrows located in the top right corner of the slides box. Later today, you'll be sent the on-demand recording along with the slides and a link to the integration community where you can connect directly with our experts from the API Connect topic group. So without further ado, let's welcome our experts, and Winston, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessica. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world right now. Yes, as Jessica mentioned, my name is Winston Lee. I'm going to kick us off on this presentation. I'm from our product management team and have been leading the efforts in terms of our moves for deployments from version 5 to version 10 of API Connect. So happy to take you through that right now. So let's dive right in. Just a quick agenda. We're going to go through some higher level overviews in terms of how to plan a migration from version 5 to version 10. And then we'll jump into kind of some more scenario-based overviews where we talk about, the decisions between, what a simple migration path may look like for your deployment, or let's say in a more advanced path where you could possibly take advantage of a few bells and whistles that come along the way with the migration process. And then, of course, we'll round it out with the additional resources. We always have more assets for you to view and to help you guide along the way while you're engaging in your migration activities. So I'm going to dive right into a comparison chart here. And folks, I just wanted to let you know that on the screen, we have a little bit of a graphic hiccup here, but I'll let you know what's supposed to be on here, as well as the fact that you can download the slides after the presentation. On the right-hand side where it says version 10, all of those boxes should be checked by checkboxes, and very few, meaning either none or none will be checked on the version 5 column, and about 2 of those will be checked on the 2018 column. And basically what we mean to highlight here is that over the various iterations in terms of the versions that we've released into the market, we've always been the market leader in a lot of these areas, in addition to the fact that we're always delivering you new stories, new reasons to jump onto the latest infrastructure, and we're happy to help shepherd you along the way in order to do so with all of these resources like this webinar right now. So kind of diving in, another thing that is important to highlight with the deploying within version 10, you have the flexibility to deploy however you'd like, wherever you'd like, whether that be through our Cloud Pak for integration, as a standalone solution deployable on-prem or any other cloud, or let's say you want to bring your own OpenShift and EK8 or OVA on VMware. API Connect got you covered there, right? And then, of course, we have our, IBM managed API Connect reserved instance offering as well, where, of course, you have that single tenant instance with the ability to add on any possible on-premise gateways as well. So that's like a really quick overview of, let's say what's great with version 10 and the iteration over time. But I understand that a lot of the meat and potatoes here that we're focusing in on has to do with the fact that, of course, all great things must come to an end. We have this era of version 5 where, we've delivered great capabilities to you, and we know that you love it. We've enhanced them so far, but there is an end of support date that we do have scheduled for April 30th, 2022. Do keep in mind, this slide was made, I believe, a month back, so that means we have a little over perhaps half a year left for us to, get you onto the latest version of API Connect, which means that those planning discussions, those upgrade discussions, we highly encourage you to start having them right now if you haven't already. So do keep in mind that there's a plethora of resources that will be discussed throughout the call that you can access, whether that's via our Upgrade Central website that will constantly echo throughout the call, as well as any sort of additional tooling that this presentation is about in order to technically get you over there, right? Meaning there's a technical tool to allow you to land on version 10. And then, of course, please don't be a stranger. We have a very large, prolific community here where, over 1,900 members, where you can have strong, meaningful connections and discussions with us and have a Q&A where we will engage with you. So please do engage that community as well as the IBM support channels that you're so much familiar with. Now, diving right in, I had mentioned again, I will be echoing this throughout. We've put together quite an extensive guide and visual resource on this link URL right here that allows you to understand the various upgrade paths. This presentation itself is scoped to V5 to V10. Please do look out for resources in the future on V2018 to V10 in terms of webinars, but this is your single source of truth in terms of where do I get information on upgrades for API Connect. Now that I've kind of explained the ideas of, version 10, okay, we're great, migrate, and the support we're chasing makes sense. I'm going to dive into that actual overview of the planning that I was discussing before. So keeping it kind of short and simple up front, version 5 to version 10, that delta is considered a version migration, and it is a direct migration from version 5 to version 10, meaning you do not need to hop to any other versions between version 5 and version 10 in order to get there, which adds a lot of convenience for you, especially if you're still on version 5 and didn't move along in the midst of it. So do keep in mind there's an external tooling called the AMU, API Connect Migration Utility, and that is a tool that you can download from Fix Central today, and it's been available for a while now, tested and successful in many various scenarios for migration, and that's the tooling we'll be discussing today. So, one thing that I always like to have as part of the conversation initially is, how do we start discussing the migration and what are the various phases? I'll go through it kind of quickly here. Of course, as I said before, familiarize yourself with the requirements up front, reading through that Upgrade Central page, perhaps glancing at some detailed documentation, but at this point you want to just establish that high level understanding of it. Once you have a good idea within your team on what migration entails, of course, this is the point where you can have fun with the team and really decide what form factors for version 5 you want to go forward with, as well as any availability requirements your organization may have. That, of course, will then impact the topology and architecture of your deployment later on down the line. For the better, of course. And once you've made those key decisions, that's when you start actually doing the planning, meaning you'll start looking at more detailed technical documents to understand the best practices. We have a few kind of embedded in this presentation that we share with you, as well as defining an actual timeline, understanding, let's say, what your current and future architectural plans are, including level of customization of the environment itself. Keep in mind, this conversation can go at the pace that your organization operates at. I've seen these go as fast as a week in terms of discussions, because we really do want to kick off these migration activities for you all, right? And the last phase here has to do with acting upon that migration itself. So you want to, of course, install and configure that the target environment. You want to do some test migrations at a micro scale as well, and then, of course, ultimately migrate to the new version 10 environment and get you in production. So that is a kind of quick gist of the phasing here. When you're having those planning discussions, we do want to give you examples of what you would be discussing in the room when you're having that topic come up. Things like location, the various topology choices, the gateway choices. We'll touch upon that in a second. What's your time frame? What licensing things should be considered? All of these things will help you kind of understand and assess what elements you need to consider when hopping over to version 10. Now that was the overview of it. We're going to go ahead and now kind of jump into a migration overview before I pass it on to Chris to illustrate the scenario. But again, the other money question aside from, when is end of support, when I need to chase a certain deadline and whatnot, what is and what isn't migrated is the number one question we get, right? This can be separated into three various buckets here, folks. That is the fully auto-migrated assets. These are assets that, our organization would deem mission critical. These are things that are within the provider organization, such as your APIs, your products, your catalogs, the consumers within those, various subscriptions, any custom policies that are tethered to your assemblies and gateway extensions, all of those elements that are really the core of the assets within API Connect are fully auto-migrated. And then we have the semi-auto migration. And what we mean by semi-auto migration is there may be an additional manual step, either that's one step or n number of steps required to move certain customizations that you had in version 5 over. Things like portal delegated user registries, that may be touched upon a later slide with Chris. Things like portal customizations need to be manually refactored as a result of a Drupal baseline change. So these are elements of semi-auto migration bucket, or that bucket right there. In terms of what isn't migrated, these are things that didn't necessarily make sense to migrate because they're specific to the version 5 environment. These are infrastructure configurations such as your server definitions, your analytics data. That's less so in the infrastructure configuration, but you have the ability to offload it on version 5, and in the interest of the time of your project, of course, offloading is more efficient for your organization, most likely. And then any sort of transient data, such as pending invitations, like links to invite them to that specific version 5 environment. Of course, those links will point to version 10, and they're not, of course, logically migrated over. But that's kind of the, zoomed out view of what is and what isn't migrated. Next, what I wanted to show really quickly is these two slides, basically just to illustrate that whether you're going from OVA to OVA or from OVA to OpenShift or a different Kubernetes platform or the cloud of your choice, note that this utility that we've created, developed, architected, tested will allow you to move from VMware deployment on version 5 to any environment of choice on version 10. And that is really the power here, folks, is this ingests the data from version 5 and then, of course, transposes it into version 10 friendly formats and then posts it to version 10. We'll go into more detail in the future slide, but that is really the power of this tooling. Now, one thing I also want to give you as a resource is just this kind of zoomed out timeline view of, the various phases of the migration preparation stages, actual migration stages, and the verification stages. You'll see this referenced maybe a couple times throughout this presentation, but here's just another diagram or visual for you to reference in moving over. With that, I'm going to share a tidbit of some best practices for incremental migrations. One nice thing about the tooling, and I'm just going to go back really quickly to show you that this process, while it may be a timeline, the migration piece of this can actually be broken down into chunks for your team to better do an incremental migration. And what do we mean by that? Of course, the process allows you to migrate as much or as little of the content as required. The data can be migrated over iteratively at the scope of a provider organization, a catalog, application area, etc. The scope can be scoped down or up as needed. And then you could, of course, push that data iteratively as many times as needed, and the content within the version 10 environment won't be overridden. So there's, lessened risk as you move through this process. And of course, this tooling was intentionally built so that we can allow you to have these various best practices for doing your incremental migration. And the last slide that I wanted to share with you before I pass it over to Chris to take you through some scenarios is the simple versus the advanced migration paths. Now, Chris will take you into the actual steps associated with these paths, but basically the gist here is we have a simple, quicker migration path, which is, of course, if you haven't started your migration already, and let's say end of support is something you're really chasing and you have deadlines and whatnot, we do recommend that simple, quicker path for you. Of course, this is where the ease of migration is the most important. It's time pressing, even more time pressing than in advanced scenarios. You would be using a specific gateway service that we show here. You still get a performance improvement of 5 to 15% in this scenario. It's still handled by the AMU entirely. No additional development there. And then in terms of the API source migration, no modifications are required, and all of your policies will be covered via the gateway service. Now, where we see more advanced things come in is when you are utilizing things such as the version 10 API gateway service. Of course, that gives you significant performance improvements of 5 to 10x of your existing metrics, such as your, let's say, transactions per second. But of course, with that, there's some refactoring required, which is why this scenario makes more sense when API call performance is most important versus something like ease of experience of migration. I know I've said a lot so far, so I'm going to go ahead and shift gears here and allow Chris, our expert here, to take you through what those steps mean in these various paths. So, Chris, just want to verify you can hear me and you're all good. I'm going to pass.
Sure. Hey, Winston. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Cool. Okay. So we're going to walk through what the migration steps involve, and we'll split that into two parts, really, along the lines of the topic we just looked at, which is really all about whether we're looking to migrate and preserve the shape of things we had in v5 as far as the gateway is concerned, or whether we're going to reshape things a bit in order to take advantage of the capabilities of the new API gateway. So we'll run through the steps, which are pretty straightforward. So here's how it works. The migration tool, you can think of it as an extract, transform, load tool, ETL tool. So what it does is read content that has been taken from v5, and it converts it into the format of all the various objects and artifacts that v10 understands, and then it drives the v10 platform REST API to push that content in. And the starting point is actually on the v5 system that you have up and running. And there's a command on the command line of a management node that extracts the v5 configuration data. That command is config db extract, and it's been there since 5087. So it's there in all versions after that. And that produces an archive. It's a big tar GZ archive that contains essentially everything that the management database on your v5 system knows about. So that's all of the API definitions, all of the catalogs, all of the published products, all the apps and subscriptions, and client IDs and all those things that were under the configuration control of API Manager and v5. And that's true for all the provider orgs and all of the admin content as well. So that produces this big archive, which essentially is a complete view of your v5 system, with one exception, which is that if you happen to be using the portal delegated user registry feature in v5, there's an additional extract to do. And that's because in that particular case, there's some additional information that's held only in the portal nodes in your v5 system that isn't in the v5 database on the management nodes. And so this extra extract brings that information along as well. So with that, you have your essentially a complete representation of your v5 system in the form of an archive. And this is where the migration tool comes in, which is that we run a command called archive unpack on the tool itself. And just to set the scene, by the way, the migration tool is a separate little executable that you can download from Fix Central. It offers just a handful of commands, and this is the first one of those that's relevant here. So this command called archive unpack does what you might expect. It unpacks the big tar.gz that we pulled from v5, and if you were using the portal delegated user registry as well, then it will read the file you extracted from the portal, or files potentially, and merge the contents. And what it produces is interesting. So it produces a file system tree on your local machine where you're running it, on your laptop or on your development system. And that file system tree, starting at a directory called cloud that we create, contains a sort of hierarchy of directories, all of which contain human readable files that represent all of the objects in your v5 system. And more than that, they're all in the they're all in the v10 format. So literally what you would see is under cloud, you would see provider organizations, and you would see an admin org folder. After each of the provider org folders, you would see catalogs, and you would see published products, and you would see draft APIs, and all the things that you're used to seeing. And each one of those things you can open up and look at if you want to. So that's the first step, which is to run that unpack command. And then there are a couple of things to do just to sort of point it at your v10 system, if you like. In fact, we'll talk about that here. So there's a step to essentially just drop in a bit of a pointer to the v10 system. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the differences between your running v5 system and your running v10 system that's sort of up at the same time, although all the configuration contents like APIs and product is going to be the same, logically, one thing that will be inherently different is the names and locations of your gateway services in particular. Because the v10 environment is a new environment, those gateways will have different names and addresses and so on. So there's a little step, which you'll find in the docs, just to essentially add an entry to this content that points at the v10 gateway service or services, and tells the migration tool which type they are, whether they're the v5 compatible gateway service or the new API gateway service. And that's sort of the minimum, just to orient the migration so that it knows how to pour the contents into the v10 system. Now, there are more things you can do. So in contrast to previous migrations, it's actually possible to edit the contents, and we can come back to this a little bit. But if, for example, there are catalogs that aren't going to be needed in the v10 system, or let's say some user registries that you're using have different names, that sort of thing, then there are additional steps you can do to essentially put little overrides in this unpacked data so that it'll pick up the new names of things rather than the old v5 names of things. Or you can reshape the contents. One of the other possibilities is something like removing all the consumer orgs so no one's logged in. They just registered and never accepted their invitation. So that sort of thing is possible to reshape the data a bit before you push it into the target v10 system. So with that, once you have your unpack, then there is a command that the migration tool provides called archive push. And the push command pushes the contents into the target v10 system. In fact, there's a login that you do first just to authenticate with the v10 system, and then you do a push. And before you do the real push, if you like, to actually send the contents into v10, it's usually worthwhile running what we call a dry run. So there's a dry run flag available on the push command. And what that does essentially is check that all of the prereq things are present in the v10 environment. And so examples would be if you have catalogs that are configured with particular gateway services, or if you have, a certain set of provider orgs, then those things must exist in their sort of, shell form in the v10 system, meaning that, for example, if you're going to populate a provider org, the provider org must exist. It doesn't have to have anything in it, but it must exist on the v10 system. So what the dry run does is basically make sure that all the pieces fit together and that both on the v10 system, everything that's needed is there. And even within the cloud folder, it's possible for there to be references among objects. So for example, if there's an API that refers to a TLS client profile, take a random example, then that content must be sort of resolvable. And so that's what the dry run does. It just checks those things before you say go. And then, with all that being good, we run the real push. In other words, the same command is just without the dry run operation, without the dry run flag, and that operation pushes the content into the system. Now, it's worth adding here too that you don't have to do this all at once. So you can migrate, as much or as little as you want, each go. So, for example, you can go catalog by catalog or provider org by provider org, if you find that there are any things you want to revisit, or if things have changed at some point on the v5 system since you first pushed some content in, then you can kind of go around the loop again. The migration tool, by the way, won't overwrite anything that's already present in v10, so it's pretty safe to run it multiple times, and it'll just ignore the stuff that's already there. We are adding also an overwrite flag, which means that you can explicitly ask it to overwrite if you want to, but by default it won't do that. So it's pretty safe just to iterate if there are more and more things you want to pull across and add in. So that's the push, and all that's left there is just to make sure that the things you see in your v10 system are the things that you're expecting, and run some sniff tests to make sure that the API endpoints are live and work and so on. And more information in the run book that's an additional piece of documentation for the migration tool. So that's pretty much how it works for migration. And there's one extra step that you can see as a sort of grayed out middle step here that we'll talk about next, which is that if we're using the features of the new API Gateway runtime, which was added in Data Power as a sort of core piece of runtime capability a little while ago, then there's this additional step that we run through just to reshape the API assembly contents primarily to exploit those features. And so the way to think about that is that of these two options for the gateway in v10, the one that you'll see labeled as v5 compatible is essentially running the multi-protocol gateway flow that is the same sort of runtime machinery that we ran on v5, and that's why, of course, it'll run those APIs unmodified. And the new API Gateway service is a different runtime that understands a few different things and operates a little bit differently at the sort of assembly policy level. And the extra step in the advanced migration path is really about converting the assembly contents of APIs so that they are spelled in the way that the new API Gateway understands. So if we look at those steps in a bit more detail, the extract from v5 is identical. You don't have to do it again. there's no difference. The unpack and these additional mapping steps are unchanged, but this additional step in the middle, called the port here, takes advantage of an additional command that the migration tool provides, and that's the archive port to API gateway command. And what that does is to read the contents of the APIs that have been extracted and their products that go with them, and it produces a copy of those artifacts that has updates in the internal content of assemblies in particular, but some other detailed flags, if you like. And so what that does then is convert things like the policies that were applicable to a v5 runtime into the policies that are the equivalents for the new API gateway runtime. And in some cases, those are a one-to-one match. And in some cases, there are some additional policies that you'll see added in. So there's some finer grain control that you have in the new API gateway. And you'll also see, if you look inside the assemblies when this has happened, that there's some comments that have been added in the code that let you give you some hints, if you like, about any other things that might need taking a look at. And those include, just some details, like if you're running gateway script inside your APIs, there are a few sort of fine-grained differences in what's accessible in the new runtime versus the old runtime. And there's a list of those details on the Knowledge Center. So that's the extra step, the port to API gateway command. And again, you can do as much or as little of this as you want. So you can choose, for example, whether you want to run all your APIs in the new API gateway, which of course will be the way to get the best performance out of them, or if there are a set of APIs where that's less critical, but you just want to run them unmodified because it's not where you want to invest in changes, that's fine too. You can skip porting those and deploy those to catalogs with v5c gateway services. And a given catalog, by the way, can have both gateway service types connected to it. So in the same API catalog, you can have some workloads running on the new gateway and some running on the old gateway, and that's all fine. And they can even coexist in the same physical data power if needed. So that's sort of the way this works then for the more advanced migration. The rest of the steps are the same. So after doing the port to API gateway command, all that's happened really is that you've got some additional files in your expanded cloud directory, and you'll see that they have an extra sort of name tag added to them that says API GW for API gateway. And then when you run the push command, you can run, if you choose to, a flag that says only push in API gateway artifacts, or it'll push in both, if you have a combination. And of course, you can choose to scope your push to as few or as many of these things as you want. Often it's easier to break things down into, like other than doing a blanket conversion and push of an entire catalog, let's say. It's often easiest to target 2 or 3 APIs just to kind of get a feel for how the pieces fit together and run those end to end, and then go for the rest. But many options there. So that's the more advanced migration step, if you like, which involves the conversion of APIs to the new format. All of the sort of surface area stuff, by the way, of APIs doesn't change, as a result of this. So what users will see on the developer portal doesn't change. The way that, that clients interact with APIs doesn't change. This is purely about the internals of the way that the assembly logic is spelled under the covers, if you like. And you'll see it in the source too if you open up those APIs. A few other options. I'm not going to read them all out, but you'll see if you do -H on any of the API, any of the migration tool commands. There's some other options we haven't talked about, but not important to read all those here and now. But more to go look at if you like. So under the covers, there's a few things that sort of make all this work, and there's sort of a little bit of a sliding scale of, if you like, performance versus compatibility. So the two extremes are, for the most compatibility, the least change, then you can leave your APIs unmodified from v5 and run them in v5 compatible mode. All good. And that means they'll run in the multi-protocol gateway and do all the things they used to do. At the far right, if you like, is you can convert everything to the new API gateway runtime, and they'll take advantage of the new gateway features for performance in particular. And somewhere in the middle, what happens under the covers, not sort of totally visible, is that when we run the port to API gateway command, it actually takes advantage of the ability to sort of do a bit of both. So it will convert your assemblies to exploit the new API gateway runtime, and your APIs will run in that runtime, but they'll use some policies that are a bit more compatible in their execution detail than the sort of full API gateway ones. So that's net of that piece. The summary, if you like, that essentially what we're looking at in terms of making a choice between whether we do the simple or advanced migration is really about a trade-off between performance and preservation of your old content or original content unmodified. And the trigger really for figuring out which one makes the most sense is really about how critical performance might be to you for particular API workloads on the gateway. And so that's the motivation for adding the extra step to convert those things. So at this point, I will pass the baton back to Winston. Over to you, Winston.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris, for walking us through those scenarios. As I mentioned earlier, folks, we of course have a plethora of resources for you to take a look at, and I'll show them on the screen right now and kind of give you a gist of level of detail on each one of these. Upgrade Central, of course, is that website that we had linked earlier on in the presentation. This is meant to be your master list or single source of truth of any resources and guidance, whether that be pointers to the Knowledge Center documentation that you're familiar with, or the other assets kind of written here. This is your kind of central hub for understanding any upgrade paths. In this presentation, we were specifically focusing on v5 to v10 scenarios. That page actually covers things in addition to those. Let's say if you're in 2018 to version 10, I understand that there were some questions in chat that I shared with all of you, the response to it, in case you're interested in that path. There is guidance on that website for that scenario. The technical runbook here, our very dedicated development folks within the API Connect organization have authored over 50 pages of technical guidance over time and kept it up to date with change logs and everything, right? To give you detailed prescriptive guidance on how to utilize the tooling, things such as, what its various warning codes mean, error codes in the event that you do encounter them. These are really kind of informative things that will help you and make your overall migration experience a lot easier for you to kind of quickly sift through this PDF to take a look at any parts that are relevant to your process. And then, of course, Knowledge Center that you're familiar with the step-by-step guidance in case you're more used to that kind of progressive disclosure of information via our typical Knowledge Center style. Of course, the most important resource here, I would say, is the utility itself. Nothing easy without this utility, right? In terms of this v5 to v10 path, you want to utilize this latest AMU tooling available on IBM 6 Central. Let's say we have a fix that comes out. Please do keep in mind that the fixes typically don't come out on the same days as the migration utility. If we do issue a new fix, you can expect that utility to be out within a week or so of the release. So that is one help pointer there. And then, of course, if you need help outside of what these documents are covering, please do open up a support ticket with us. It only betters our understanding of what your challenges may be. And of course, read the IBM Support Must Gather guidance on, what are the materials that you should gather as part of the discussion, prior to the discussion with IBM Support to make this process a lot easier for both ends. Now, team, I know that we're over on time, and that we have some remaining questions. I'm going to hand it back to Jessica just to see where we are. I can at least kind of stick around to see if there are any questions I could cover. Then I know that Chris and I have been going throughout answering certain questions, and then there are a few that I believe Chris is going to be looking at as well. So, Jessica, I'm going to pass it back to you then.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that great presentation. So we actually have a couple of announcements before we close out. Since we are over time, what we'll do is continue this conversation in the IBM community. It sounds like Chris and Winston will stay online where they'll be able to respond via text box once we close out. So if you stay logged in, you'll be able to chat back and forth. But I just want to share that the IBM integration community has the API topic group. This is a great way to connect with our experts, IBM champions, and other customers for any questions. We're going to send you guys a link to this community, but it will also include the link to this on-demand recording as well as the slides. So you'll be able to download these slides and access all of these great resources that you just saw on your screen. In addition, once we close out the webinar, we have a survey. So if you have any requests for future topics, any specific questions or feedback, there'll be an opportunity to submit them there. So I just want to take this moment to thank everyone who could join us around the globe today. Again, Winston and Chris will stay online via text box to kind of respond to those questions, and everything else will connect via the integration community. And again, you'll automatically get an email later today with all of those links. So thank you, Winston. Thank you, Chris, for that great presentation. This concludes today's webinar. We hope everybody has a great day. Thanks so much.